Hello everyone, and welcome to Module 7, Product Tampering. Product tampering, also known as product contamination or product hoaxes, can be construed as a form of marketplace terrorism for a company and can cause loss in revenue and brand credibility. In this module, we're going to discuss two main cases regarding product tampering. But before we start, let's look at some definitions so you'll know what I'm talking about. The first is product tampering. According to the FBI, this is an alteration of a product, its label or container, with reckless disregard for the health and safety of consumers that use this product. Tampering may place consumers in danger of death or bodily injury, and/or cause serious damage to the product name and the organization that owns it. Now, don't confuse product tampering with product recall. A recall is a request that a batch or an entire production run of a product be returned to the manufacturer, usually due to this discovery of safety issues. Consumers are used to recalls. During these past few years, we have had recalls from General Motors, Honda, Toyota, and so forth. A recall can be dangerous to reputation too, especially in the case of these automobile manufacturers, in that they knew for years that their products were faulty. However, most problems with products are found early by the manufacturer and oftentimes just become an inconvenience for the consumer because the product needs to be repaired or it needs to be returned for a refund. Many times a product recall is not a full-blown crisis for the company. And finally, a hoax. A hoax is a plan to deceive a large group of people. It's a trick or a practical joke. Even though hoaxes are usually meant to be funny, unfortunately, deliberate product hoaxes with pranks and practical jokes have cost companies millions in dollars to rebuke the hoax and rebuild the brand after a meaningless prank has been played. So let's talk about a classic case in public relations history in which a horrific product tampering cost the lives of innocent people, as well as a company millions of dollars to regain its consumers' trust. This case is known as the Tylenol murders, which occurred way back in 1982. Let me give you a little background about the company and the product. In 1886, brothers Robert Wood Johnson, James Wood Johnson, and Edward Mead Johnson started the Johnson & Johnson Company in Brunswick, New Jersey, with a desire to mass produce sterile surgical dressings. In 1887, a man by the name of Robert McNeil bought a pharmacy in a section outside of Philadelphia and became one of the foremost pharmacists of his time. After his death, the company became McNeil Laboratories in 1933 and focused on manufacturing the highest quality pharmaceutical products. Now, as early as the 1940s, physicians were concerned about giving aspirin to children for pain and fever. So then, in 1955, McNeil Laboratories introduced Tylenol Elixir for Children. Tylenol now is called an acetaminophen, not an aspirin, and it was found to be as effective as aspirin for pain and fever, but without the stomach irritations and other complications that aspirin can cause. Then in 1959, Johnson & Johnson acquired McNeil Laboratories and expanded the Tylenol product line to what it is today, which is one of the most profitable over-the-counter pain relievers. So now let's look at the situation facing Johnson & Johnson in 1982. According to an October 11th, 1982 Newsweek magazine article, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman of Elk Grove, Illinois, awoke at dawn with a sore throat and a runny nose. Her parents gave her one extra-strength Tylenol capsule and at 7 a.m. they found her dying on the bathroom floor. Paramedics found 27-year-old Adam Janis collapsed in his home, his pupils fixed and dilated. Despite efforts to keep his heart going, he died. Later that day, his grieving relatives shared a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol they found in his home medicine cabinet. Adam's brother Stanley, 25, died that evening. Teresa, 19, Stanley's wife of only 3 months, held on for 2 days until doctors abandoned efforts to save her life. By the weekend, 3 more women, Mary Reiner, Paula Prince, and Mary McFarland, were found dead. All in all, 7 Chicago area residents had died from cyanide poisoning using extra-strength Tylenol. So who were the publics affected by this crisis? Even though crises had occurred before, nothing of this magnitude had ever come about where people were actually being poisoned by a product. So the organization, Johnson & Johnson, had to look to its mission statement or credo to help guide it in its decision-making and who its publics were. Obviously, the enabling public was James Burke, and he created a 7-member strategy group to guide him. The functional publics were Johnson & Johnson employees, doctors, nurses, patients, stockholders, anyone affiliated with the organization. Normative publics were the communities in which the employees lived and worked. And diffused, well, of course, the media, other manufacturers of similar products, and law enforcement. I put law enforcement under the diffuse category because even though this was a criminal offense, CEO James Burke made the decision not to recall the product, even though the FBI did want him to do so at first. Let's look at some of the crisis theories that were used. For this crisis, the decision theory was used and was successful. This theory assumes that the decision maker, in this case CEO James Burke, can effectively identify the problem and that his goals, values, and objectives are clear in regards to the crisis situation. Even though Burke set up his strategy group, and there they are in the picture, and in today's term this would be known as a crisis team, he took full responsibility and made clear decisions which used the company's values and credo as his guide. In this situation, the decision theory worked for Johnson & Johnson. In addition, the image restoration theory was also partly used by this Tylenol team. Corrective action was taken in that the capsules were immediately removed from the shelves, and new packaging was created, and I'll talk about that later. And mortification. Johnson & Johnson knew it needed to reach out to consumers, even if it wasn't the organization's fault. So the company apologized to consumers, healthcare workers, pharmacies, anyone who used this product. It apologized that this had happened and vowed that the company would do all it could to prevent this from ever happening again. And finally, for the situation crisis communication theory, it was a product tampering crisis, which is considered a victim cluster, which results in low responsibility attributed to the company. This helped the company reestablish its reputation faster with its consumer base. Some of the communication strategies used were victimization. Johnson & Johnson was considered the victim of this terrible crisis. The product tampering that was causing the death came from an outside source, not the company itself. Corrective action. The company pulled the product from the shelves and created new packaging to help curtail a perpetrator from easily opening it. In addition, in 1986, cyanide poisoning was happening again in the New York area, and there were additional deaths. So the company removed capsules entirely from the shelves and never sold Tylenol in the capsule form again. Ingratiation. The company had a long history of offering outstanding consumer products. The company used this strategy to show credibility to its key stakeholders. And finally, compensation. Even though the exact amount of compensation was never given out to the public, money was given to the family members as settlement for this tragedy. When we look at crisis tactics, we start with, obviously the first was to recall the product. This was the company's first action, and it was immediately out there to alert consumers across the nation so no one else would be killed by their product. They used the CEO, James Burke, as a spokesperson. The team strategy from Burke was first, how do I protect the people? And second, how do we save this product? They also were reaching out with messages. They stayed with their key message of consumer safety first. Although Johnson & Johnson was not responsible for the tampering of this product, the company assumed responsibility by ensuring public safety first and took the required steps to get the product off the shelves. It established communication through 1-800 toll-free phone lines, and it did this for consumers and the media with constant updates on these toll-free phone lines. It also repackaged the product and did full-page ads in major newspapers. Excuse me. The repackaging of the product was very important because they first called it tamper-proof, a triple seal, which is how we have our products now. But since in 1986, when deaths occurred again, they changed the term to tamper-resistant, not tamper-proof. And then finally, as I said, in 1986, the company totally discontinued any kind of capsules. We now have caplets or other kind of gel tabs to help us make it easier to swallow these pills, but there are no Tylenol capsules. Look at this. There have been a lot of additional tampering cases, as you can see, and there's many more than I have here, and they still continue. But the two I want to focus on briefly are the Coors 1988, a mouse in the can case, and the CVS Stores case, where a man used and replaces enemas. Let me just talk about these briefly, because both of them happened in Jacksonville. In 1988, a man said he opened his Coors beer and found a dead mouse inside. He immediately called a lawyer and Channel 12 News. He basically wanted to extort money from the Coors company. But through forensic evidence, Coors found that the mouse had been killed by a mousetrap and then had been shoved into the can, not dying there in the manufacturing process. This man went to jail for extortion, and Coors unfortunately lost more than $1 million because of this product hoax. The second one was more disturbing. A man in Jacksonville went to various CVS pharmacies and purchased enemas. He would then use them, reseal them and fill them with water, and then return the product for a refund. An employee became suspicious and finally called police. But there were 21 people who had purchased these tainted enemas before this man was discovered.